God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Beningo. I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a sixth-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist and counselor, and I am here breaking down the Justice for John O'Keefe case. Now, since the exoneration of Karen Read, I have been very busy digging through the archives, specifically focused on all of the testimonies of the police in this case. And as you're about to see, there are two groups of cops that are most responsible for everything that goes down on this very first day of investigating the death of John O'Keefe. There's the local cops, the Canton police, and then there's the Massachusetts State Police, made up of what used to be called the CPAC unit. These are the group of special investigators that work solely and specifically on behalf of the district attorney's office, who in this case, of course, is Michael Morrissey. We're going to hear from both groups of investigators with the intent of tracking down the most important evidence in the case. Now, if you've been following the Karen Read case, you fall into one of two camps. You either believe that she is guilty, full stop, that's it, or you believe that something else happened, that Karen Read did not hit John O'Keefe with her car, and that then points the finger in the direction of the people in the house at 34 Fairview. But the evidence, and really the only evidence in this case that was working on behalf of the Commonwealth, were the taillight pieces on the scene at 34 Fairview. Now, interestingly, as you're going to see, the very first group of investigators, the local cops that were on the scene immediately once Karen and Carrie Roberts and Jennifer McCabe stumble upon the body of John O'Keefe at 34 Fairview, these cops immediately call the CPAC unit, the MSP, and they initially say, no, this is a medical event. We're not going to get involved. So they deny taking the case. Now, that changes within an hour of first saying we're not getting involved, right? As soon as they learn that, this wasn't a medical event. But up until then, because the snow is coming down, the Canton cops have to do what they can to preserve whatever evidence is on that scene, and they make every effort to do that. And that is where we see Lieutenant Gallagher and his snowblower.
Sir, who's the person holding the leaf blower?
That is me.
Did the leaf blower work as you had hoped?
It was great.
You see other footprints around that area.
Correct.
Do you know how those footprints got there?
Some of them were from first responders. Some of them were for witnesses. The ones up top by the flagpole were for when the officers put out the crime scene tape.
Did officers try to wrap the crime scene tape around the flagpole?
They did wrap it around the flagpole, yes.
I see. And from that vantage point, could you see the side and front yard?
Yes.
Did the side yard have any footprints or evidence that anything was dragged through the side yard?
No, not at all.
How about the front yard? Did the front yard have any evidence that anybody had walked across it or dragged anything across it?
It had one set of prints from Sergeant Lang.
Other than Sergeant Lang's footprints across the front yard, was there any other impediment?
No, not that I saw.
I'm going to ask if we could see the second video, please, Ms. Gilmer. Could you stop there, please? You see the end of the leaf blower?
I do.
There's an object just below it at like 7 o'clock. Do you see that?
I do.
Did you discover something in that area?
We did.
What did you discover?
It's a cocktail glass.
Was it, did it have any damage to it?
It did.
Describe that for us.
It was broken on the top.
Could you continue the video, please, Ms. Gilmer? Stop, please. There's some red spots. Is that what you identified as coagulated blood?
That is.
Below some of those spots and to the left, there's an area that's not white. It's brownish. Do you know what that is?
That's, I believe, just bare ground.
So it's not until later on in the day, approximately around 5:30 or somewhere around, where taillight pieces are unearthed, and then in the month that follows continue to reveal themselves into the tune of 46 pieces of taillight. Let's take a look at what is happening on January 29th of 2022. Okay, so our first stop in this investigative journey, we are going to hear from Sergeant Sean Good. Now, Sergeant Sean Good is among the first responders. He's actually the dispatch cop who takes Jen McCabe's 911 call and is one of the first responders on the scene where Carrie Roberts, Jen McCabe, and Karen Reed stumble upon the body of John O'Keefe at 34 Fairview Road.
Ended up dispatching my own officers, my downtown cruisers to 34 Fairview, and then I had one other cruiser come back to the station so I could get down there. I would guess it'd have to be less than 5 minutes. So I phoned Lieutenant Gallagher and Detective Sergeant Lank.
Why that?
Just policy, the seriousness of the call. Lieutenant Gallagher was the off-going lieutenant the night prior, the shift prior, so that's what you usually do. And Detective Sergeant Lank is in charge of the detectives.
Now, when you left Canton Police Station to respond to Fairview, who, if anyone, assumed your role as far as manning the dispatch area in the 911?
That'd be Officer Dever.
I want to direct your attention. What was your duty assignment on that day?
Ms. Dever is the person that takes over dispatch for Sean Good so that Sean Good could go to the scene and begin to organize what would eventually be the sequence of events that would take place next, which include bringing Lieutenant Gallagher to the scene and the person who was in charge of all of the detectives for Canton PD, Michael Lank.
January 28th, moving into January 29th.
I remember I was on patrol. I don't remember anything further about this night.
Did you work overnight, like a late shift going into the morning of January 29th?
That was my assigned shift, so yes.
Okay. Who else was working with you on that particular day, if you recall?
Sergeant Good, Officer Mullaney, Officer Seraph, and Officer Pasquarelli.
Did you note that a call came in related to a person found in the snow, unresponsive in the snow?
Yes. I was in my cruiser. A call came in that said person in a snowbank, something along those lines. Immediately followed by that transmission, my sergeant requested that I come to take over dispatch.
Is that Sergeant Good?
Yes.
So I pulled out of the police station at 1492 Washington Street, taking a right onto Washington, heading south.
And then where did you go from there?
And then I took a right onto Chapman Street.
And as you're approaching, or as you're en route between the police department and Fairview Road, what, if anything, did you observe as far as road conditions, visibility, things like that?
It was terrible. Heavy snow, wind, visibility was awful.
And when you arrive on scene, what is sort of the first thing that you observe upon your arrival?
As I was coming down the hill, visibility was pretty bad. Obviously, I noticed the fire engine. Ambulance was already on scene. Both my two officers, cruisers, were also on scene.
All right, so this is the dash cam footage from Sergeant Good's cruiser, and this is him pulling up to the scene at 34 Fairview Road.
If you're looking at the house, it'd be left-hand side, slightly probably right in front of the flagpole.
And about how far off of the roadway would you estimate that was?
I would say 8 to 10 feet.
So we're talking here about where John O'Keefe was found, about 8 to 10 feet off of the roadway by the flagpole and the fire hydrant.
Off the curb.
Speaking to other people without reference to necessarily what was said to you, following your conversation with Officer Seraph, who, if anyone, you speak to next?
I believe the first person I could really get a statement from was Miss McCabe.
And this is important because Sergeant Good is one of the first police on the scene and the first person that he spends any time speaking to about what happened is Jennifer McCabe.
It was a chaotic scene. People just kind of walking in and out. And so Miss McCabe was the first one that was able to give me a good statement of how they ended up here. Next was Miss Reed. So I walked Miss Reed to the back of 682. She was obviously cold. Got her in the back of the car, put the heat on, asked her, how did she end up here? How did her boyfriend end up here? She says, I don't know. Confused, hysterical, shock. She was yelling out, is he dead? Numerous times. Oh, she was yelling it. I asked her if she had driven there, And she said, I think so. And then right after that, she said, I don't remember. Because of her state, I decided to stop questioning there. She couldn't keep her train of thought. Detective Sergeant Lang probably got there at about 6:20, 6:25. I immediately briefed him what we had, what was going on so far.
Yes.
All right. So what do we learn from Sergeant Good? We learned that he spent some time speaking to Jennifer McCabe first. Then he spoke to Karen Reed and discerned that she was out of her mind to the point where he shouldn't and couldn't continue to interview her, that he wasn't going to get anything, much from her because she's completely out of her mind, or what we call in psychology, dysregulated, right? And that, of course, is an important detail because according to the Commonwealth, she is a vicious murderer who intentionally runs over her boyfriend just a few hours earlier.
And who, if anyone, called you around that time?
Sergeant Sean Good. I believe it was 6:08. Sergeant Good stated that there was a gentleman found in the snow at 34 Fairview Road, and he was in very grave condition. And he brought it to my attention that he was also a Boston police officer.
Okay, now this is really important. So, Detective Sergeant Michael Lank is the head of the detectives that are working for the Canton Police Department, which is the reason why he is called to the scene. But his job as the detective is to try to now figure out what happened. That's his primary role.
I went to 34 Fairview Road. I live fairly close, so I was on scene by, I believe it was 6:24, 6:25. When I arrived, I observed that the ambulance was still there. There was multiple EMTs, and I observed some witnesses also.
And upon your arrival on scene, who was the first person that you spoke to?
Sergeant Sean Good.
And then following talking to Sergeant Good, who, if anyone else, did you speak to once?
I spoke to Jennifer McCabe.
After you spoke with Ms. McCabe for 8 or 9 minutes, then who, if anyone else, did you speak to at that?
All right, so now you'll notice that the second police officer to do any investigating at the scene is Mike Lank, who, by the way, is a very dear friend of the Albert family. Grew up with Chris Albert, the brother of Brian Albert, who lives at 34 Fairview, and is also a buddy of Jennifer McCabe, who now he gets to the scene and speaks to for 8 or 9 minutes. So we have both cops speaking to Jennifer McCabe first and foremost. This is the person that they are getting their information from.
After I spoke with Ms. McCabe, I believe I was able to then contact the CPAC unit.
Each troop duty lieutenant would have a list of who the on-call person is for the State Police Detective Unit of Jurisdiction. They would then call that trooper or sergeant directly to inform them that there's a death in a certain community and give them a telephone number to contact somebody who's directly on scene to get more information.
All right. So this is Detective Lieutenant Brian Tully, maybe the most important person to this entire investigation. He is the head of what is formerly known as the CPAC unit, the Crime Prevention and Control Unit, or the group of officers from the Massachusetts State Police that work for the district attorney, in this case, Michael Morrissey. Brian Tully is the boss of this group, which means he's the head of the charge, the leader of the gang. And it is also important to note that Brian Tully has sat in on every prosecutor prep meeting for both trials. He is very present at every stage of the investigation. And he's the guy behind the scenes who's, leading the charge, telling everybody what to do, where to be, where to go. And as you're going to see, plays a absolutely vital role in the events that are about to take place throughout this day. So what do we learn? We learn that Mike Lank, the homicide detective on the scene for the Canton PD, contacts the Massachusetts State Police, as is protocol to do, during these early morning hours. And you'll note that Mike Lank already knows by 7 a.m. that John O'Keefe is a Boston police officer. Pay close attention to that detail.
CPAC unit is the investigative division for the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. Yes, any sort of scene where it appears that the person is not going to survive, we would contact State Police CPAC unit because they investigate all deaths. In speaking to Trooper Proctor, he advised me at that point that they would not be responding.
It was originally given to me as a possible medical situation. Sergeant Bukhenik called me at approximately 6:48 that Saturday morning, advised that Canton PD had a male party that was discovered in the snow outside of a residence, and he wasn't sure what had happened.
In this specific situation, as I stated earlier, the DA's office has exclusive jurisdiction over death investigations, and our office has that responsibility of investigating those cases, but we work very well with local departments.
Shortly after 7 a.m. that date, I received a call from Sergeant Yuri Bukhenik informing me that a person by the name of John O'Keefe was found unresponsive in Canton.
Now, I want you to notice the language here. Brian Tully's using the language unresponsive. And that might sound familiar to you because coincidentally, that's the exact same language that Jennifer McCabe uses to describe John O'Keefe in her 911 call. And you'll note that in this 911 call, which is just a clip you're about to hear, Jennifer McCabe is speaking to Sergeant Good.
911, what's your emergency? I need someone to come immediately to 34 Fairview Road, Canton, Mass. What's going on? There's a guy unresponsive in Recusal.
He was transported to Good Samaritan Hospital, where it was expected he was not to survive.
Okay, so remember, he was already dead. So we learned from the defense's case in chief, and maybe the most credible expert witness the world has ever seen, Chief Medical Examiner, formerly for the state of Rhode Island, Dr. La Posada, who very eloquently explains to us that he would have been dead within essentially moments of having received the injury to the back of his skull, but they don't know that.
Now, from the Canton Police Station, where did you and Sergeant Bukhenik go?
The McCabe's house in Canton.
And who, if anyone, did you speak with there?
We spoke with Matthew and Jennifer McCabe, as well as Brian Albert.
And those interviews that you conducted, were they how were they conducted?
One-on-one, Sergeant Bukhenik and myself kind of rotated out Jennifer, Matthew, and Brian. So first we interviewed Jennifer, and then once that was completed, we had her step out, go to a separate room, brought in Matthew, and then the same thing with Brian.
After this interview with Michael Lank, you eventually made your way back to your house. Is that right?
Yes.
You went with your husband, Matt?
Yes.
And you knew that Trooper Proctor was going to show up and interview you and Matt, Mr. McCabe. You told Brian Albert that Trooper Proctor was planning on interviewing you as well.
Correct.
Before Trooper Proctor showed up to conduct that interview at your house, Brian Albert actually showed up at your house, correct?
Correct.
So Brian Albert made sure that he was in your home before Trooper Proctor made it to your house, correct?
Objection.
After the interviews at the McCabe household, Sergeant Bukhenik and I traveled to Good Samaritan Hospital for two reasons. One, we knew Miss Reed was there receiving treatment for Section 12. And two, we wanted to view Mr. O'Keefe.
And do you know about what time it was that you arrived, yourself and Sergeant Bukhenik, at the Good Samaritan?
Maybe approximately 1 o'clock.
Sergeant Bukhenik, in this case and in typical cases, he's keeping me updated by telephone, so I can supervise from anywhere with my cell phone. He's giving me updates about what he's learning. We will discuss what the next steps should be. And that's what transpired over the morning of January 29th.
This is me interrupting your programming to remind you to like this video right now. And don't forget to subscribe. Like this video.
The first thing I noticed on Mr. O'Keefe is he had abrasions on his right arm. On the top of his right arm, there's approximately 6 to 8, ranging from his forearm to his lower bicep. There was no injuries underneath that forearm. Both eyes were swollen and black and blue. He had a cut on, I believe it was his right nostril. Another smaller cut.
I believe it's actually his left nostril.
It was on his left eye.
I believe it's on his right eye.
Those were the injuries that kind of jumped out to me. The clothing seemed it was wet. It was pretty well saturated. The right sleeve had some like cuts to it, like tears to it. There's like blood and vomit on it, if I recall.
Now, this is important also because the Commonwealth wants you to believe that John O'Keefe was hit by the vehicle, would have immediately fallen back, hit his head, and been incapacitated, okay? That's what their story was, at least for the second trial. But if there was vomit on John O'Keefe's shirt, on the front of his shirt, meaning that he vomited forward, there's no way that he could have vomited forward and been incapacitated by a fall backwards from the vehicle. That is not what happened, right? And that vomit is critical to our understanding that that couldn't have happened. Of course, not to these investigators who are essentially operating with pea brains. So certainly that didn't matter to Michael Proctor, who didn't think for more than 30 seconds about what probably did happen or how it could have happened. Because again, he's already decided Karen Reed's guilty. Doesn't matter. None of this stuff matters. None of this stuff is worth giving a second thought to because he's already decided that she's guilty and this is why. Now, one thing that I skip over here, both Yuri Bukhenik and Michael Proctor focus almost exclusively at that point at the hospital on the fact that a shoe was missing, that John O'Keefe only had one shoe. And both of them stress that this missing shoe must mean there was a car accident because in their, very little experience, they are programmed to think one shoe means, there must be another shoe somewhere else, and he must have been, quote, knocked out of his shoes. They make a point, both of these investigators, on multiple occasions of stressing that the unequivocal evidence to them that pointed to Karen Reed and a car accident happening was going to the hospital and seeing only one shoe. Okay? Now, remember, we just heard from Brian Tully that Yuri Bukhenik is keeping Brian Tully abreast as to what's going on. So these two, as they're leaving the hospital, they call Brian Tully. They tell him about the abrasions on the arm, which they think, and we hear from Brian Tully later, is a mark that would have been left by the taillight because of their genius, which we know is absolutely physically impossible thanks to Newton's laws and physics. We know that did not happen. Those marks did not come from the taillight. We know that definitively with 100% certainty. It is not possible. But they don't know that. They, because of their feeble little brains, believe, thanks to one shoe at the hospital and marks that they just assume are from the taillight, right? They call Brian Tully, they tell him that, and so Brian Tully believes or starts to get into his head that what they're looking for at the scene would be the other shoe and possible taillight pieces.
He picked it up and I held the bag open. But I could be wrong. Maybe I picked it up and he held the bag open.
That's fine. The two of you together got him in a bag.
Yes.
Was it a paper bag or a plastic bag?
It was a large paper bag, the size of like a lawn leaf bag.
Did both shirts go in the same bag?
All the clothing items that were in the pile went into the same bag.
So they're talking about confiscating the clothing that the first responders took off of John O'Keefe from the hospital, putting it into an evidence bag. Note, all of the clothing went into the same bag.
That include the jeans and belt and boxer shorts?
Yes.
Okay. You went from Good Samaritan, straight to Dighton, correct?
Yes.
And you are the one that put the bag in your the super cab of your pickup truck?
Yes.
And then from Dighton, you went over to Canton PD, is that right?
Yes, we did.
And then from Canton PD, ultimately, before the night was out, you ended up back at the Norfolk DA's office, which is where you and Michael Proctor officed at the time, correct?
Yes.
Generally, if we take an item for evidence, we'll put it in a brown paper bag, document it, time, date, who secured that item, address, where it's discovered, and then we'll bring that back to our office, to the evidence processing area. From there, it'll go to a permanent evidence room that has triple retention. It has an actual key, a key card, and an actual access code, and only 3 members of my office have access to that room, the 2 evidence officers and Detective Lieutenant Tully.
And at this time, on January 29th, 2022, who was assigned as the evidence officers who had access to that room?
So that'd be Trooper David Achico and Trooper Jeffrey Kukowski.
All right, so a couple of details here. First of all, you should note none of that evidence that they've confiscated, none of the clothing, none of it makes its way into the evidence area until March 15th, and you'll note that this is taking place on January 29th. Number 2, let's take a look at who these officers are that have the triple retention into the ultimate evidence area. David Achico, Officer Krakowski, and of course, Detective Lieutenant Brian Tully. And you'll note that one of the text messages confiscated by the feds in this case was a text thread with Michael Proctor and his bosses, or his fellow Massachusetts State police officers, right? Fanning and Bukhenik are 2 of his bosses, and look who else is on this. The 2 evidence officers, Achico and Krakowski. These guys are liking and responding to an image of David Yannetti in his military fatigues from when he was a kid. And these are Michael Proctor's responses to that by Achico, who sends that image. Proctor then says, "Funny, I'm going through his retarded client's phone right now. No nudes so far. I hate that man. I truly hate him." And this is in August of 2022. Now ask yourself, of all of the people on the defense team, why would you hate David Yannetti, who's like the nicest guy in the world? And of course, it cannot be said how utterly disgraceful these text messages are about looking for nudes. He later says that was a joke. Haha. You tell me whether you think that was a joke. That's important. The Canton Police Department is 4 minutes from 34 Fairview Road, right? And they will tell us that the reason that they decided to bring the car to the recused location of the Canton Police Department is because it's a heated garage. But really, it's because it's 4 minutes from the crime scene, and it's where their offices are.
On January 29th, 2022, at no point in time did I or Michael Proctor, who was with me the whole time, ever respond to 34 Fairview Road.
Now, in addition to Sergeant Bukhenik is one of your supervisors within the detective unit, is that correct?
Yes,
And is another one a Lieutenant Brian Tully?
that's correct.
Now, with respect to the one sneaker that was found in Mr. O'Keefe's property, what, if anything, with regard to that, did you communicate to Lieutenant Tully?
Objection.
As to how it goes to the investigation,
Yes.
I'll allow it.
Sergeant Bukhenik and I informed DLT Tully that there was one shoe at the hospital.
And with respect to Detective Lieutenant Tully, are you aware that subsequently in the afternoon that there was a search that was conducted in the area of 34 Fairview Road where Mr. O'Keefe was found?
Yes.
All right. Now, this is important because there are a number of occasions where scumbag Adam Lally does everything that he can to assist the Commonwealth or to assist the cops in making it seem like Karen Reed is guilty. And one of the ways that he does that very early on in the testimony, much earlier on than would have made sense in the actual timeline or sequence of events of what was happening on the day in question, Adam Lally misleads the jury by by bringing up that the Massachusetts State Police found taillight evidence at 34 Fairview.
And are you aware of what, if anything, was recovered in the area where Mr. O'Keefe was found on that day?
Objection.
I'll allow it as to the investigation.
Of course you will.
Yes.
And what are you aware of?
We were informed, Sergeant Bukhenik and I were informed that CERT team and Detective Lieutenant Tully discovered a black Nike sneaker with the white swoosh logo that was a match to Mr. O'Keefe's shoe at the hospital. When a homicide comes in, everyone essentially drops what they're doing, and we all work on it together. So it's a collective effort to work on these cases, and essentially the case officer is just kind of the record keeper of all the reports that come in and video that comes in. But when it comes down to decision-making time, it's a group effort.
So that's true. One thing that you learn following this investigation closely is that, yes, Michael Proctor was the lead investigator, but when it came to decisions, he was the lowest man on this totem pole. There's no question that the decision maker we're going to learn now, or the decision makers that we're going to learn from Brian Tully now, are not Michael Proctor.
Now, over the course of the morning of January 29th,
and we learn, for those of you that may have missed it from other videos, that when these sirens are interrupting the trial, at least from Brian Tully's perspective, he believes that when he hears them, they are for him specifically. And if you've watched a lot of this trial, you know that you might think that you were in New York City because of all of the sirens that go on throughout the trial. It's absurd. If you've been to this town, if you've been to Dedham, where the trial was held, it's this teeny little rural town, bucolic town. Where there is no need for the constant barrage of sirens that you will hear throughout the trial.
over the course of the morning of January 29th, what, if any, conversations did you have with relation to Canton Police Department's involvement or ongoing or further involvement with regard to this investigation?
I had spoken with the acting chief at the time, the current chief, the chief at the time, Kenneth Berkowitz, about the involvement in the Canton Police Department. We talked about the homeowner at 34 Fairview and his relationship to his department. And because of the appearance of a conflict, we had made a decision that the Canton Police was going to take a step back from the investigation and that state police would do the investigation without them.
Now, with respect to those conversations you mentioned that you had yourself and what the then current chief, Kenneth Berkowitz, who, if anyone else, was involved in those conversations?
The district attorney.
That would be Mr. Morrissey, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So importantly, the people making the most important decisions related to this case, thanks to Brian Tully, we know are the chief of the Canton Police Department, Kenneth Berkowitz, the district attorney himself, Michael Morrissey, and he's making these decisions along with Brian Tully. So Brian Tully is like the chief bulldog who's doing the dirty work for the DA and the chief of police.
Alleviate any perception, not that one existed. The Canton Police Department recused themselves from being involved in the interview portion of the investigation.
And of course, that's different from what Brian Tully says. According to Brian Tully, they were completely recused, minus the fact that, you'll note, where they tow the SUV to is the Canton Police Department. So not only does he bring that up as though it happens much earlier than it actually does in the sequence of events, he also references that search happening in the afternoon. As it turns out, that search happens much later than the afternoon. But he's trying to make it sound to the jury as though that taillight evidence was found by the police before they took custody of Karen Reed's vehicle. Now, I didn't include this detail in this video, but you should also know that on the original paperwork that Michael Proctor submits to his office, he tries to make it sound like the vehicle, Karen Reed's car, is confiscated later than it is. He makes it sound like they go get the car at 5:30 instead of 4:15. And he says that's an accident, but of course, that is very intentionally such that as this paper trail unfolds, it appears at first glance like this investigation at 34 Fairview happens before they confiscate Karen Reed's Lexus. But it does not. And it's the video that eventually emerges that disproves or that proves what time Karen Reed's car was confiscated. It's the ring video at the home of William Reed, Karen's father, that definitively proves what time that tow truck comes and picks up the Lexus. You'll also note that by the time that these guys leave the hospital, so it's like 2 o'clock, they already are contacting Brian Tully. Yuri Bukhenik is contacting Brian Tully, and they are saying, we are en route to where Karen Reed is at her parents' home in Dighton to confiscate that car. They don't have a search warrant. They haven't applied for a search warrant. And they have already decided by 2 p.m., simply from talking to the McCabe's and Brian Albert, from going and viewing the body at the hospital, that Karen Reed is guilty, and they're going to go take what they think is the murder weapon. That's 2 o'clock.
Now, as far as the drive from Good Samaritan, that's in Brockton, is that correct?
Yes.
As far as the drive from the Good Samaritan Brockton to the defendant's parents' home in Dighton, about how long a drive was that, and how would you describe the weather conditions along the way?
Yeah, the weather conditions were whiteout, high winds, blizzard conditions. We had to travel very slow. It was almost about an hour to get there.
And at some point, did members of the Dighton police come along and join?
Yes.
And do you recall who those people were?
I believe one of the officers' last name was Barrios.
You work for the Dighton Police Department, sir.
Since 2011.
And what's your position there currently?
Currently, I am a sergeant.
I want to draw your attention to January of 2022, a few years ago. January 29th, 2022.
Around 2:30 in the afternoon, I received a call from the troopers assigned to the Norfolk District County DA's office in regards to a vehicle that was at a residence in the town of Dighton.
What were you asked to do? Why did you get that call?
The troopers said that they were coming into my jurisdiction, and as a courtesy, they wanted me to respond with them.
Is that sort of normal protocol? If you go into somebody else's jurisdiction, you let them know?
Yes.
So that was not necessarily unusual?
No.
About what time did you receive that first call?
The first call was around 2:30 in the afternoon. I got a second call around 3 p.m. From Trooper Michael Proctor stating that he was about 10 minutes away from the address in Dighton.
What time did you actually arrive at the residence?
I arrived at the residence, I believe it was 3:27 p.m.
At the time that Michael Proctor called you, did he say anything about what his intentions were once he arrived at the location?
Yes, his intention was to retrieve a vehicle that he said was involved in a homicide. I believe the first phone call, that was his intention.
All the way back to 2:30?
2:30 is when he first called me and said that they were coming to Dighton to retrieve a vehicle that that occurred in a homicide in Canton. My role was Trooper Michael Proctor asked me to facilitate a tow to tow that vehicle. I arrived and I parked my cruiser at the end of the driveway. I observed a black Lexus SUV in the driveway.
This is the afternoon of January 29th, 2022, correct?
Correct.
Before the vehicle had been seized formally by Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Bukhenik, correct?
Correct. There was, it was damaged, the taillight was damaged, but there was a crack missing, but it was not completely damaged. A piece was missing. Can you see that? So this area was intact. This is what I saw was missing here.
But the taillight itself, the piece was missing, and as you got closer, there's a metal sort of square, and one of the pieces was sort of sticking out. And I only remember it because I thought if someone walks by that, they're going to catch their jacket on it.
Is this the condition of the right rear taillight when you showed up at the Reed household at around 3 3:15 in the afternoon on January 29th, 2022?
Absolutely not.
All right, so there you go. You have two people who saw that taillight before it was confiscated by the cops, Carrie Roberts and Sergeant Barrows, both telling you that that piece, that corner piece there, was missing. And Carrie Roberts remembers it because she said, you could catch your jacket on that piece. However, neither of them say anything about the entire taillight cover being removed from the vehicle. And that's important because as the days and weeks would go on after this day, the cops confiscate, including the chief of police. They happen to be driving by 34 Fairview, and they just keep seizing more and more taillight, saying that, it's because the snow melted. That's why the taillight, as they would say, revealed itself. In the end, they end up, I think, with 46 or 48 pieces of taillight. And one thing you can never forget about this case, these cops did not expect this much attention to be placed on them, right? This was supposed to be cut and dry, as we heard from Michael Proctor, right? Cut and dry, serious charges are going to be brought on the girl. All the powers that be want this done, want this wrapped up, easy peasy. They did not only expect Karen Reed to fight, but it to become the public spectacle that it would.
That middle section was intact when I was there. Towards that right side where that large chunk is, that's what was missing.
We followed the tow truck from the address in Dayton to the Canton Police Department. We're secured in the Sallyport Bay.
And if you know approximately what time was it that you arrived at the Canton Police Department and secured the defendant's vehicle in the Sallyport Bay?
So we left Dayton around 4:16 p.m. and arrived in Canton at the police department at approximately 5:31 p.m.
Now, one thing you have to keep in mind, remember 34 Fairview is 4 minutes away. So let's say with the weather conditions, maybe it's 7 minutes, something like that.
And with reference to the Canton Police Department's Sallyport garage, why was the vehicle taken there?
It was taken there because of its proximity, its ease for them, and because of its proximity to the 34 Fairview location. And it was determined by Detective Lieutenant Brian Tully, not by Michael Proctor. It was Tully that tells them, by his own admission, to take the car to Canton.
I wasn't part of that decision, but it's my understanding that it was a heated facility. The other options were, I believe, the barracks in Milton, but that's not large enough to house a vehicle that size, and it's not heated.
All right, couple things here. First, you'll note we have somebody walking in from this side door, right behind the right rear taillight. The other thing you need to know, if you don't know this already, during the first trial, the Commonwealth presents this video only the mirrored version, which was very confusing. A mirrored version, when you see it, shows us what appears to be the passenger side. So when you see these cops huddled around the taillight, it appears to you to be the left side taillight, not the right side. And as Yuri Bukhenik is on the stand and being presented the mirrored video, nobody mentions that it's mirrored. And while in that line of questioning, Adam Lally, who of course knows that it's mirrored, is asking Bukhenik, do you ever go through, at any point, do you go near the right rear taillight? And he says no. He asks them, is this an accurate representation of what you saw that day? He says yes. And it's only when the defense later on has an opportunity to carefully examine the video that they are able to see that some of the letters, you'll note in this old looking cruiser next, in the garage, you'll see the word police on it. They note that that was backwards. But importantly, though the Commonwealth tries to claim that they didn't know it was mirrored or that that's just how it came to them, you'll note that the way that the timestamp is placed on it correctly. In other words, somebody intentionally mirrored the video and then placed the timestamp on correctly so that it appears to be the left taillight is right, the right taillight is left, and there's not all these people, huddled behind the right side of the taillight in the video. They are busted, and by the way, it is not the only time that these guys are presenting video that is doctored. So they're busted. The defense does bring that whole episode out in the second trial, but you'll note that there's a group of people huddled behind the right rear taillight, and that's important to pay attention to. So we're going to take a closer look at who the hell are these people near the car when it first pulls into the Sallyport.
And in regard to the heated, what was the sort of purpose or utility of storing it in a heated set?
Miss Reed's vehicle was covered with snow and ice at the time it was transported from Dighton to Canton.
So now there's 4 individuals back there behind the taillight. If you're counting, you just have to carefully watch heads.
And with regard to the Sallyport garage area of the Canton Police Department, at some point were you inside that area?
Yes.
And what, if any, observations did you make as far as the temperature or the heating within that facility?
I don't remember the exact, I couldn't put a ballpark on temperature, but it was certainly warmer than outside.
Now, as far as the vehicle was concerned, either on scene, either in Dighton or at the Sallyport garage, or at any point in time that you were in the presence of that vehicle, what, if any, contact did you have? What, if anything, did you do or observe Sergeant Bukhenik to do with regard to that damaged area you described on the right rear passenger side?
Yeah. Sergeant Bukhenik and I never touched any part of that vehicle.
All right.
We tried to set up a perimeter as best we could using caution tape, and just kind of sectioned it off.
Did you know?
All right, so, well, let's hear here.
Chief of Police Ken Berkowitz before you responded on the 4th to 34 Fairview?
Yes, I knew who he was. I had met him previously, and he was present on the 29th when the vehicle was delivered to the Sallyport.
And he was present, so there he is. This right there is Chief Kenneth Berkowitz. Now, I've investigated this video very, very closely to try to figure out who the guys were in the Sallyport on this day. And after a lot of investigating, I know this is Chief Berkowitz. You'll see that Michael Proctor is somewhere in this vicinity. That might be him there. You'll know that it's Proctor because underneath his arm, he has a file folder. And I believe this guy is Yuri Bukhenik. Now, it looked an awful lot like Brian Tully, and so I wasn't sure at first. But after carefully examining this video, I believe this is Yuri Bukhenik. This is Chief Berkowitz, and over here is Michael Proctor.
9th when the vehicle was delivered to the Sallyport.
He was actually in the Sallyport at least at some time when the vehicle was delivered, correct?
He was there at some point. I had a conversation with him.
Go ahead. Did you tell those law enforcement agents on August 9th, 2023, that you saw Brian Higgins and Chief Berkowitz go into the Sallyport together and alone with the SUV for a wildly long time?
That was my recollection at the time.
So you did say that?
At the time, that is what I recollected.
Okay. Agreed with that statement, here on the witness stand, you would be implicating 2 officers as having been in the Sallyport, weirdly, for a wildly long time with the SUV, implicating not 1, but 2 fellow officers, correct? That's what you would be doing.
It's not possible I saw
If you
that.
agreed with me, would you be implicating the reputations of 2 officers?
If I was to lie, then yes. My entire job revolves around what I say on the stand right now.
How long had you been on the Boston Police Department at the time that you were invited to go up to Commissioner Michael Cox's office?
I would say somewhere in the range of a year.
Okay. Did you find it unusual that a rookie police officer would be called up to the Commissioner's office personally to discuss a matter?
it was a reflection of how good of a leader he is. It was not anything that I found unusual, given the fact he is someone who wanted to show support for his officer.
And who else was in that office?
Me and him.
A year ago, when you talked to us, the defense, did you tell the defense that when you were called up to the commissioner's office, he told you two things? Commissioner Cox told you, number one, the Boston Police Department supports you, and Officer Deaver, do the right thing.
So he said my name correctly. He said Dever, and
that's my mistake. Let's see. Like, you want me to repeat the question so I get
So,
that right?
Mr. Jackson, let's go ahead and answer, please.
yes, and he said nothing with the intent of guiding me one way or the
I didn't
other.
ask you what his intent was, madam. I asked you what he said to you. What were his words to you?
That he supports me.
And?
Just wanted me to tell the truth up here.
And his words were, do the right thing, correct?
I don't recall.
My name is Kevin O'Hara, O-H.
All right. So remember that Ms. Devers is the one that takes over for Sergeant Good at dispatch, and we learn later that she winds up staying on overtime into the next day, and in all likelihood, in the end, they forged documents to make it look like she left at the end of that shift around 3:30, when that couldn't have been possible. She must have stayed later, because if you saw my video where I analyzed in a lie detective sort of fashion her statement, her testimony, she absolutely did see Chief Berkowitz and Brian Higgins, who most of us believe is responsible, at least largely, for the death of John O'Keefe, with the Sallyport alone for a wildly long time. In all likelihood, she had stayed throughout the entire day, and then later was presented documentation that she had left before, so she couldn't have possibly seen them alone with the car, because the car didn't make it to the Sallyport until 5:30 that day. Now, this is Kevin O'Hara, and you're going to learn that he is in charge of a special unit through the Massachusetts State Police called the CERT team.
ARA. I'm a lieutenant with the Massachusetts State Police. I'm the team commander for the State Police Special Emergency Response Team, which is known as CERT. I'm also the search and rescue coordinator for the state of Massachusetts. As a team, we conduct monthly trainings at least twice a month, where our team will come together and train. So for CERT, we have three main mission types. We will do lost and missing person searches, we will do evidence searches, and then we also do crowd control or security at large-scale events, such as the Boston Marathon, the July 4th celebration. We get assigned to Gillette Stadium for all the events down there as well. We'll receive requests either internally through other members of our department or externally from outside agencies.
I want you to take us back to January 29, 2022. Were you contacted, or was a request made for you to consider and accept the mission?
Yes, I received a call from Lieutenant Tully. I told him we would be able to respond. I asked him if he had started the request for approval up his chain of command, which he hadn't at that time. He stated he would start on that, and then I contacted my captain after getting off the phone with him to start the approval process through my chain of command. He called me at 2:32 p.m.
All right, so this is important. So Kevin O'Hara is called at 2:30 by Detective Lieutenant Brian Tully to see if their services would be available. He says they are. The two start the process of getting permission by the powers that be to use the CERT team to help with the investigation at 34 Fairview. Now, here's going to be the important part of all of this. We have to carefully track the timing that all of this takes place. Most of us believe that Lieutenant O'Hara is a straight-up guy, is not a part of any cover-up of any type. And the key here is understanding the timeline.
I determined how many members we would need to respond to that search, which at that time I figured we would need 8 members to respond. Normally, as the team leader, I'll function more of an incident command role behind the team, documenting some of our efforts. So we dispatched 8 members to the scene. Unfortunately, due to the snow, one of my members was not able to respond, so we only had 7 members officially arrive on scene, including myself.
What time did you arrive at 34 Fairview?
4:56 p.m. Just prior to my arrival, one member arrived at 4:54 p.m. Trooper Blake Bearden arrived at 5:21 p.m. Sergeant Charles Luis arrived at 5:24 p.m. Sergeant Michael O'Brien arrived at 5:24 p.m. Trooper Scott Viscardi arrived at 5:34 p.m. and Sergeant Anthony Carrier arrived at 5:41 p.m.
Now, there are some obvious challenges with the timeline, according to Kevin O'Hara.
Lieutenant Tully informed you in that first phone call that colleagues of his, Massachusetts State Police colleagues of his, were already en route to Dighton to retrieve or seize the SUV.
He did not say that, sir.
Did Lieutenant Tully inform you that Massachusetts State Police had actually contacted the Dighton Police Department for their assistance in potentially seizing that SUV?
He did not tell me that, sir.
Did he indicate to you, you indicated that your conversation was at 12:32. Did he indicate that he had just gotten off the phone with Dighton PD at 12:31, 2:32, and he had just gotten off the phone with Dighton PD at 2:31? Did he indicate anything like that?
No, we did not, sir. So I told Lieutenant Tully that we had received a snow that day. I told him most of the members, including myself, may not have shoveled out their driveway. I told him at best case scenario it would be an hour plus response time, depending on how long it would take people to shovel out their driveway.
All right, so why is it important? So here we have Lieutenant Tully. You have to put yourself in his frame of mind, okay? So he's thinking, evidence, what are we going to be able to prove? In his mind, he believes Jennifer McCabe and Brian Albert, Karen Reed had a cracked taillight, there was pieces missing, and they realize, and we know this because of Michael Proctor's text messages, that there are going to be things that they can and cannot prove, and so far there's no evidence, thanks to the early investigation of the Canton police officers, that there was any kind of vehicle collision at the site at 34 Fairview, okay? No accident. There's no evidence of an accident, and there's no reason to think there was an accident except from the statement by Jennifer McCabe of a cracked taillight and her saying, could I have hit him? That's all they have. Now, Lieutenant Tully is sitting at home thinking about, okay, we have to get a search team at the site. And he knows, because he just got off the phone with Yuri Bukhenik, that they're now going to be going at 2:30, whatever. They just called Dighton, remember Nicholas Barrow's testimony, to say, can you organize a tow truck to William Reed's residence to pick up the car? And now Brian Tully is contacting the CERT team and saying, hey, can you guys get things moving to come to the scene? So in his mind, he's strategizing to make sure that this CERT team investigation is happening after they have possession of the car. That is what is happening. We also know, by the way, that Brian Tully holds up the CERT team investigation at one point. Okay. So, according to this timeline, Kevin O'Hara is at the scene at approximately 10 minutes before 5 p.m. at 34 Fairview. But when he gets there, he has no idea where they're going to be searching. He just knows the residence, the address. So he arrives, and he usually would be in charge. He'd be the detective, or he would be the lieutenant in charge. But on this day, it's Brian Tully who's in charge. It's Brian Tully who's responsible for documenting the evidence, documenting the scene, and actually, as Kevin O'Hara explains, he's going to be on the line with the guys doing the search, which he would not normally be doing.
When you got there, you did not know at that point where you were going to be directed to search, correct?
I did not know, sir.
All you knew was a residence and an address, correct?
Correct. Normally, I would stay behind the line of searchers, documenting what they do, more of as a command role. But because we were one member short, I wound up participating in the search, more hands-on than maybe normal.
Lieutenant, when you arrived, given the fact that you did not know where you'd be searching, you've actually indicated previously that the flagpole, the fire hydrant, et cetera, that part of the lawn, that part of the yard, was behind you as the cruisers pulled up and you parked your cruisers waiting for everybody to get there, correct?
When I arrived, I parked almost at the end of the driveway of that residence, sir.
Okay. Was your tail facing the flagpole, or was your nose facing the flagpole?
Tail was facing the flagpole.
So you pulled up to the driveway, I'm guessing from Chapman?
Yes.
North?
Correct, sir. Yes, from Chapman. Same side as 34 Fairview, sir.
Understood.
About what time is it that you arrive in the area of 34 Fairview?
About 5:30.
All right. Now, if Brian Tully does not arrive on that scene until 5:30, there is no way that the CERT team could have started searching before 5:30 because, despite what Kevin O'Hara tells us, they wouldn't have known where to search. And they have to turn their cruisers around and they face the cruisers at the search site so they have better lighting, because at this point it's already dark. It's 5 o'clock. It gets dark even earlier, actually, in Massachusetts in late January. So it's dark. It's still snowing. And these guys cannot have started searching until after 5:30 because Brian Tully had to get to the scene to tell them where they were going to be searching. And that's what Kevin O'Hara tells us, despite telling us that they must have been on the line and starting to search at 5:20. That's not possible. So they did not begin to search until 5:30 at a minimum.
And had yourself or any members of your unit, to your knowledge, been at 34 Fairview at any point in time prior to your arrival there that day?
No.
Objection.
Yes, once I spoke to Lieutenant Tully, we wanted focusing on a specific area to search.
So the area and the grid area that you ultimately decided to search and ultimately were directed to search, that was all behind you?
Yes, it was.
And it was dark out, obviously?
It was dark. It was winter, so it was dark at 5 o'clock. As they arrived on scene, they would come out because Lieutenant Tully had already arrived on scene. He was technically the third member of the state police on scene.
Okay.
So once he got on scene, I was already out talking to him, and I was marking off the area we were going to search. We moved my cruiser and Trooper Boussolet's cruiser at 5:20. We had started gridding off where we wanted to search.
Not possible because Lieutenant Tully didn't arrive to the scene until 5:30. So somebody's not telling the truth. Either Lieutenant Tully was there earlier. I don't know why he would lie about that. Maybe he was there earlier. But either way, they're not searching until Tully is on scene.
But at 5:20, that's when we moved our cruisers to put the headlights on. That's right. Trooper Bearden and the two sergeants arrived quickly after on scene. So by 5:24, we started. All five of us were lined up shoveling. When the two other members arrived on scene, they just joined in on the line to help us move.
Specifically, Lieutenant O'Hara wanted to know, what are we looking for and what's the scope of the items we're looking for? So we had discussion about how much taillight we believed was missing from Miss Reed's vehicle, so that as we go along, we would know if we had it enough, or we had it all, I should say.
So there it is. There's Brian Tully's big confession. You know, you can't make it up. So what does Brian Tully have on his mind while he's telling us this story, right? So he's recounting what happened at the CERT team search at around 5:30 on January 29th. And he's talking to us about his conversation with Kevin O'Hara, Lieutenant O'Hara, about what they're looking for. You know, what are the things that we're looking for on the scene? And in his mind, he's thinking, what do we need to have enough to put Karen Reed at this scene? And then he corrects himself and says, oh, have it all. Make sure we have it all. But that's not what he says. What he says is have enough. And again, this is more evidence of these guys 100% aware that they do not have enough evidence as it is, and therefore are going to have to manufacture evidence. And one thing that you can never forget, these guys, Lieutenant Tully shouldn't even be on this scene. He's only there because John O'Keefe is a Boston cop. That's the only reason why he's there. He's already told us that. Normally, he would not be involved on a Saturday in the middle of a snowstorm with a death investigation. So they are there to make sure that Karen Reed is convicted of killing who they think is responsible for this, her Boston police officer boyfriend. And lo and behold, it just so happens Lieutenant Tully, it turns out, isn't by himself. And the CERT team are not the folks that find the evidence.
So that as we go along, we would know if we had it enough, or we had it all, I should say. It's that same previously mentioned red plastic. the purposes of the multiple photographs, I'll take one as overalls, and as I get closer, I'll take more photographs to give better context. Yes, this piece in particular, the CERT team member, as he was removing the snow with the shovel, had picked up this piece of plastic with it. I asked him to place it back where he found it, where it approximately was, so that I could memorialize it in place. Members of the CERT team doing their excavation of the snowbank. A black Nike sneaker with a white sole that was recovered in the snowbank. They matched both in make and model, size. The shoe that was recovered by the troopers at the hospital was a right sneaker. This one found was the left, or a left. I noticed that it's curvature in shape, and there are raised dimples, for lack of a better term, that were along the outside of this piece of plastic, or on one side of it. That is a photograph that I took at 34 Fairview that depicts a red piece of plastic. They were collected, placed in an evidence bag, and brought back to our offices to be secured.
And so how long was the entire search?
It was about 55 minutes. We started again around 5:20, ending around 6:15, sir. Approximately 6:15.
So they searched for basically 30 minutes because, as Lieutenant Tully just told us, that's when he thinks he has enough.
I believe I was the last one to leave, which was 6:23 p.m. when I left.
Who made the determination of the scope of the area that you would search?
I made the final markings of the distance we wanted to search, but we were guided by Lieutenant Tully's information he was able to provide for me. He informed me that there was a vehicle involved in the incident. He told me where that vehicle had been parked, so we wanted to make sure we started prior to where that vehicle was parked, which was almost adjacent to the front door of the house.
I saw a dark SUV out front. I can tell you I saw the vehicle first straight out from the front door. Then I saw it up at the flagpole, and then I saw it further up from the flagpole.
Right. So, geez, whose testimony are they going on to determine where the car would have been?
So he stated the vehicle was parked almost directly across from the main front door, which again, looking at the house, that's on the left front door. So we marked off that as our starting location, and we wanted to search down to the fire hydrant.
And about how long was it that you were on scene at 34 Fairview that day?
About an hour.
Now, with respect to when these items were found, do you know approximately what time the first item was located by a member of the CERT team?
Yes.
And what time was that?
5:45.
It was believed that the vehicle may have had a broken taillight, so we were looking for taillight pieces. We also were informed the victim in this incident was missing his shoe, so we're going to be looking for his sneaker as well.
Were there other people in the area outside the scene of the grid that you were going to search, other than you and members of your CERT team?
Lieutenant Tully arrived on scene.
Was there anybody with Lieutenant Tully?
At one point, he had several other people with him. Maybe, I believe, 5 throughout our search. Maybe 5 different people, including him, were on scene.
Right. So here's another example of Hank Brennan inserting his foot in his mouth, right? Because he's thinking that O'Hara's going to say, oh, nope, nobody else was on the scene. But nope, turns out, actually, Brian Tully had a bunch of people with him, and those people are never identified. 2 of them, according to O'Hara, are Canton cops. The rest, he thinks, are probably Massachusetts State Police. Nobody ever tells us who they are. And you'll notice, while we look at these pictures, these are actual images from the scene because the media eventually shows up. And you'll notice that the front yard at 34 Fairview is just untouched, that they never look anywhere in the yard, which makes absolutely no sense, right? No sense at all. If you're doing a thorough investigation, would you not have looked in the yard where John O'Keefe was actually found? But instead, they go with Jennifer McCabe's testimony, which is that he was hit by a car. So instead, they look in the street, right? And they're searching in the road because where the plow had gone, it created these snow drifts. So there are created these big piles of snow, right, as plows do, off to the side of the road. And so they're having to dig through these piles here, these big piles that were created by the plow. And that's what they're searching through. right? So they're searching in the road along the curb line, which is interesting according to ARCCA.
Those people part of state police?
At least one, maybe two. Unfortunately, I don't recognize all 2,500 members on our department, but there were probably about 5 total people on scene, sir.
You've indicated that there were other individuals who you noticed were at the scene. Is that right?
Yes, there were non-CERT members on scene, sir.
Okay. And those non-CERT members included, or they numbered, at least 5 individuals, not including Lieutenant Tully. Is that right?
I believe that includes Lieutenant Tully, sir. I believe it was 5 total.
Okay, so 5 does include Lieutenant Tully. There were 4 others that were non-CERT members, correct?
Correct, sir.
And those were members, I think you've earlier testified that those were members of either Massachusetts State Police or Canton Police or both. Is that right?
I believe it was both, yes, sir.
And right, and you remember the Canton PD were supposed to be recused. That's funny.
Did not recognize those individuals.
I recognize one of the state police members. I believe a second one was also a state police member that I'm not familiar with.
Okay.
And then 2 other members that I believe were Canton Police, but again, not familiar with them.
Was there somebody who was picking up any evidence that you may find and putting it in bags and preserving it?
After we found located evidence, it was documented on scene by the detectives.
So you yourself were not documenting?
No, and again, that's maybe a little change in the dynamics. You know, if I had been more of in an incident commander role, I probably would have documented time, location. Again, more for our internal records. The primary record will always be at the hands of the detectives. But because
So it's Lieutenant Tully who's documenting the evidence, and you'll notice that these guys are bundled up, right? I mean, and in other images that were found from this investigation, which I couldn't find, but I've seen before, there are guys on scene whose faces are totally covered. So you couldn't even tell who was working with who, and who the hell they were, right? And oddly enough, guess who's in charge of the evidence? Oh, Lieutenant Detective Tully.
I was actively searching, the detectives handled all documentation.
So when these items were found, did you examine or study the depth of those items when they were found?
I did not, sir. Gave them a glance when our team members told us we found something, and then Lieutenant Tully took over documentation. I returned to my place, on our line. We will mark items, sir.
Right. Who are these guys, right? Who the hell is that?
Measuring in between distances, they do get stamped when we mark our items. Measuring them would be at the discretion of the investigators themselves.
And obviously that would be among the best practices to clearly document how search is conducted, correct?
Correct, sir.
Another way to document the evidence or the search is to do it through either video evidence or photographic techniques, right? Just photographing, forensic photographs of where things are found, contextual photographs moving into close-up photographs, correct?
That would be at the discretion of the detective, sir.
And in this case, that discretion lay with Lieutenant Tully, correct?
Yeah, he was the incident commander, correct, sir.
And prior to you leaving from the scene of 34 Fairview Road, along with the CERT team on that date of January 29th, even at that time, did you know the full extent or how much taillight you were looking for at that time?
No.
We had a debrief meeting. So there's other troopers. There's troopers at scene on 34 Fairview Road. There's other troopers conducting interviews. So at the end of the night, members of my office met in a conference room at the Canton Police Department to exchange information as far as what everyone had learned throughout the day.
And interestingly, at no time does anybody ever tell us who those other detectives were. The only person that ever gets identified at this little debrief meeting is, guess who? Lieutenant Tully, along with Yuri Bukhenik. So all we know is that Tully, Bukhenik, and Proctor have a meeting at some point after the car is confiscated and is secured at the Sallyport. According to Proctor, from the Sallyport at 5:30, they go and have this meeting. But the timing of that doesn't work, right? Because we already know that Tully and a bunch of people with him are on scene at 34 Fairview. So you ask yourself, could these two have been two of those people at the, quote, debrief meeting that were over at 34 Fairview, which was a 4-minute drive, normally maybe a 7-minute drive away? Absolutely. Could they have all driven over to 34 Fairview, threw out some taillight pieces. Oh, and by the way, that morning, I believe there's 3, maybe 4 taillight pieces found. They're tiny little taillight pieces. So all they would have had to have done is thrown those taillight pieces down. The way that the CERT team was searching, what they were doing was they were shoveling out snow and then throwing it to the side, and then somebody was looking through each of, the snow that they had just taken off the pile. Whoever was siphoning through the pile could have very easily thrown down some taillight pieces. I mean, they were talking about tiny little pieces. These were not the 46 pieces that were found later. These were just a handful, tiny little pieces that were found on the scene, because according to Brian Tully, that was all that they needed to prove what they needed to prove on that day, which is that there were taillight pieces found at the scene. And then in the days that would follow, that's when all of the taillight kept revealing itself, including these giant pieces. Oh, and by the way, Chief Berkowitz, who was supposedly recused from the investigation, was one of the people that found taillight at 34 Fairview when he just happened to be driving by.
And as far as that meeting is concerned, that's just troopers from your unit, from your office, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so there were no members of the Canton Police Department that were present for that, is that correct?
No, correct. They had taken a step back from the investigation. They weren't going to participate in any interviews or anything of that nature. The best of my recollection was that debrief meeting that we were informed that essentially Canton PD would be taking a step back from the investigation, and that now this is just solely a Norfolk State Police investigation. The taillight piece is found at 34 Fairview Road by CERT.
Right. So guess what was discussed at the debrief meeting? First thing on Proctor's mind, the taillight pieces, right? And then the sneaker. What a surprise. So if we're tracking taillight pieces, it's very, very clear what has transpired here. These guys, once the car was secured, left the car, immediately go over to 34 Fairview, where the CERT team now begins. Because remember, the CERT team search could not start until Brian Tully arrives on that scene. They could not start until then, because nobody knew where to search without Brian Tully. So he's holding up the CERT team till he gets there. Everybody's the Kevin O'Hara is facing the other way because he doesn't know where the search team searches. At any time, once Brian Tully's on that scene, that taillight could have just been tossed down. At any time. Brian Tully tells us he had been at Canton PD, and we find out that at the very least he's there for that debrief meeting, which would have happened after 5:30.
Were you made aware that there were 3 contributors of DNA to that taillight, 3-1?
Oh, well, are you made aware of that?
No.
Once you reconstructed the taillight, you'll agree with me that it was missing a piece, correct, or pieces?
There was an empty spot on the overall reconstruction, yes.
Were you ever provided with any pieces of taillight that would have filled in that missing spot?
No.
Were you ever provided or told about any pieces recovered from One Meadows Ave in Canton?
No.
Were you ever told about a collision at One Meadows Ave in Canton? Sergeant Good, you have previously testified about the details in these reports. You would agree that each of these reflects your report. It says reporting officer Sergeant Sean Good, correct?
Yes.
Each of these is page 1 of your report, correct?
Yes.
You've previously testified that you call that the face sheet of the report, correct?
Yes.
Each of these has the identical incident number and call number, correct?
Yes.
The identical date and time reported, correct?
Yes.
The identical report date and time, correct?
Yes.
And of course, the identical officer.
Yes.
Other than the print date of the face sheet of your report, one appears to be in January, one appears to be in October, the major change is the photo that's included on the face sheet, correct?
Yes.
So that second photo with the piece of taillight that is included on the first page of your report, That photo is not from January 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
You never took a photo of a piece of taillight on January 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
You never saw a piece of taillight at 34 Fairview on January 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
Did you personally switch the photo on the face sheet of your police report?
No.
Do you know who did?
So whoever updated the report, their supplemental, you add photos.
But you, in answer to my question, do you know the specific person from your department who altered the photo on the face sheet of your report?
I didn't take the supplemental report, so I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know who took the photo.
But given that this is your report, you're the reporting officer, you are responsible for the content of that report, are you not?
For my report, yes, not other officers' supplementals to an investigation.
All right, but this is your report. This is the face sheet for the reporting officer, Sergeant Sean Good, is it not?
Yes, on the face sheet.
All right. Now, would you agree with me that someone reading this report and seeing that the date and time of the report is listed as January 29th of 2022 at 8:24 a.m., that's when you wrote it, correct?
That's when I logged in, yes.
Somebody reading that and seeing a photo of a piece of taillight might believe that that photo is from the same date that you're writing the report, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Do you think it's misleading to include a photo on the face sheet of the report when the report is dated January 29th of 2022 and the photo is not from that date, it's from sometime later?
Objection.
Sustained.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything.